Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another day of our Equitable Mindfulness Summer Series. As always, we are extremely delighted to have you here. I'm Tiara Cash, Culture and Equity Specialist at ASU and creator of the Equitable Mindfulness Initiative. And I'm joined here by my amazing teammates, Dr. Nika Guechi and Jackie Spear. We also have our guest, Jason Prue, who we will introduce in just a moment. So before getting into our practice and introduction of today's speaker and topic, I just want to remind you that the Center for Mindfulness welcomes you exactly as you are, exactly as you show up today. Please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourselves to others from around the world who have shown up just like you to engage in this wonderful process today. We'll keep an eye on the chat box for questions you might have on today's topic. And as a reminder, mindfulness is experiencing the present moment with intention. And equitable mindfulness is a bridge from mindfulness and the foundations of mindfulness to spaces of equity by ensuring that we use those foundations to break down spaces of exclusivity and to move toward more brave spaces of solidarity, equity, and justice. So keep that in mind as you ask your questions today. And as we continue, if you have any questions about the EM framework itself, please feel free to visit our website at mindfulnesscenter.asu.edu. All right, so we will go ahead and start with a practice as we always do. And so I'll invite my teammates and you as well, if you'd like to turn off your cameras, if you'd like to find a place to lay down or to sit. The invitation is to find a position that feels the most comfortable to you and for you, that allows you to show up to this practice knowing that you're in a brave space. So whatever feels most right to you at this moment, I invite you to find that position. And when you are there, I'll also invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you, or of course, a soft gaze to the floor is fine. Again, finding the space, finding the place helps you to show up as your most honorable self. And in that space, just gently allowing the breath to rock you, to enliven you, but at the same time to signal rest. Signal safety in your own body and bravery in the spaces that we've allowed to show up. Maybe noticing the rise and the fall of your chest as you take some deeper breaths. Maybe gently putting your hand over your heart, noticing the beating of the heart and the synchrony of your heartbeat and those breaths. Using that hand, the gentle hand over your heart to signal kindness and generosity. As today's special topic will be about giving and receiving in ways of the most kind spaces that we bring ourselves into, and giving those kind spaces to others through pro-social action. Maybe gently remembering the last time you gave. Was it to a friend or a family member? Was it to your pet? And seeing if you can allow that memory to give you a little warmth. What did you notice about that time, that space? Do you notice the smile on the other person's face or the feeling it gave you? Just for the time being, gently allowing that memory to fill you up. Remind yourself of all of the benefits that both the receiver and the giver get from this work, from the gift of giving. Gently letting that memory go now. Giving yourself space for a couple more breaths. Beginning to notice the room you're in, maybe hearing the sounds of the air. Opening your eyes and maybe noticing the light in the room. Again, signaling to the body that it's time to come back into this space together. Thank you so much for engaging in that practice with me today. I hope that it allowed us to get a little bit of warmth and a little bit of that benefit that we're talking about from giving as we move into the introduction of our amazing speaker today, Jason Prue, who's going to be talking about this work and how it really does benefit us in many, many different psychological ways. So Jason Prue is a PhD candidate of social psychology at Simon Fraser University. He utilizes rigorous, community-engaged research methods to understand how prosociality and positive psychology interventions can enhance people's emotional and social well-being and cultivate prosociality in youth in the real-world community settings. So we are thrilled to have Jason here today with us to talk a little bit about prosociality, positive psychology, giving, kindness. And so without further ado, I will pass over to the mic to Jason and allow him to come into the space and to utilize the platform as he wishes.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Tiara. I just want to make sure that my screen is good, great, and you can hear me okay. I wish I could start every single meeting like that with just a mindfulness meditation. It just completely changes my day. So I just wanted to thank you so much for that, Tiara. And for the lovely introduction. So as mentioned, my name is Jason Prue. I am a PhD student at Simon Fraser University. And I'm really honored to be hosting this midday mindfulness session or joining with you today and speaking about how generosity can enhance our well-being. And in fact, I very much applaud each of you for taking this hour to invest in your well-being today. Because particularly, this has been such a strange last 15 months that we've been living in. As you might imagine, the disruption to daily life caused by the pandemic and physical distancing rules have considerably impacted people's mental health around the globe. Indeed, the data suggests that there have been stark increases in the rates of people suffering from depression and anxiety. And in fact, according to the Gallup World Poll, which provides the largest, most representative snapshot of human experience on the planet, there were approximately 10% more people around the world who reported that they experienced sadness or worry in the previous day in 2020, as compared to reports from just across the previous 3 years. And similarly, a large representative survey of thousands of people in the UK shows a slow and steady increase in the overall percentage of people experiencing sadness over the course of the pandemic, as well as experiencing fewer positive emotions as lockdowns were imposed and as second waves of COVID numbers were driven up. Now, these data certainly paint a grim picture of people's well-being. Thankfully, they are just a few paint strokes in the larger mosaic that's capturing people's well-being during the pandemic. Indeed, when you look at the data for people around the world, experiences of positive emotions and life satisfaction have remained remarkably stable during the first year of COVID. While life satisfaction has declined in some countries, it's actually increased in others and has remained largely unchanged on average. Similarly, when it comes to feelings of connection, some data suggests that loneliness has increased and social connection has dipped. But by and large, the available data suggests that feelings of connection have been stable and perceptions of social support have increased. So yes, there may be noticeable increases in negative emotions, anxiety, loneliness, or even mental health concerns during the pandemic. But I don't think I have to remind the Center for Mindfulness, Compassion, and Resilience that people can and do remain resilient to the throes of a global pandemic. So how exactly do people remain resilient and enhance their well-being? Well, today I'd like to argue that engaging in acts of generosity can enhance people's happiness and social connection during this pandemic and beyond. So to help me do that, I'll first spend a bit of time clarifying what aspects of well-being I'll be focusing on during the session and what well-being researchers believe is the most effective way for people to boost their well-being. Then I'll talk about how acts of generosity may reliably boost happiness, particularly when these acts foster feelings of personal choice, efficacy, and social connection. Afterwards, I'll argue that sharing acts of generosity, like giving to charity together with others, what I like to refer to as collaborative giving, may boost feelings of social connection, another critical component of well-being. And finally, I'll end with a demo of collaborative giving and open the session up for some questions. So let's set the stage for how I'll define well-being in this talk. Now, well-being is clearly complex and multifaceted. Domains such as mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual wellness all interconnect and influence a person's optimal levels of functioning and their capacity to flourish. But well-being can often mean something different for everyone, not only for people across cultures, but researchers as well. So for example, mental and emotional well-being might look something like the short-term experience of pleasure, what scientists like to refer to as hedonic well-being. However, well-being can also look like living a meaningful life, cultivating personal strengths, and contributing to the greater good, what researchers refer to as eudaimonic well-being. But for the purpose of this session, I'll focus on what researchers refer to as subjective well-being, which can be thought of as the frequent experience of positive emotions like joy and excitement, or feeling calm and satisfied, the infrequent experience of negative emotions like sadness or worry, and having a positive evaluation or satisfaction with one's overall life. So when I say happiness or well-being throughout this talk, I'm referring to subjective well-being, or how people experience and think about their life. So with this definition of well-being in hand, it's important to ask how and whether it's even possible for people to enhance their well-being. So to help gain some insight into this question, I'd like to talk about one prevailing theory that may actually make you a little bit hungry. So according to the happiness pie model by Sonia Lumirsky and colleagues, there are three primary factors that influence happiness. So the first factor, which accounts for about 50% of our happiness, is genetics. So if your parents are pretty happy, chances are that you in turn will be pretty happy too. The second factor, which accounts for about 10%, is what we might consider to be pretty stable life circumstances, like whether you're married, whether you have a job, and yes, even if you're living amid a global pandemic. Now, life circumstances are these things that may change in your life, but typically don't on a daily basis. So people don't frequently change their job from day to day or month to month, but they can over years or decades. Now, you might wonder why things like a pandemic may have such a small effect on people's happiness than one might expect according to this model. Well, it appears that humans have a strong capacity to bounce back from major life events and return to a baseline level of happiness. So you can sort of think about this as if we were running on a treadmill. People may run faster when they have energy or slower when they're exhausted, but by and large, people generally run at their normal speed. So you can start to see in part why people's positive emotions and sense of life satisfaction have remained stable during the pandemic. Overall, people may be adapting to their new normal over time. Of course, the steady rise in negative emotions is still concerning. And while positive emotions and life satisfaction have remained stable, they haven't dramatically increased either. So if we can't change our genetics and changing life circumstances can be really challenging, how exactly can people reliably increase their subjective well-being? Well, the answer may come from the final component of the happiness pie model, that last 40% of our chronic happiness. And that's engaging in volitional activities. So volitional activities are activities that you choose to engage in on a daily or more frequent basis, like whether you exercise, go for a walk in nature, or have a Zoom call with friends. And indeed, according to Sonia and her colleagues, volitional activities are where people can make inroads to feel happier, much like training at a gym to build muscle. If we consistently practice these activities, we can start to see some real gains in our happiness. And what positive psychologists or researchers who study well-being have spent the last several decades examining are how various activities can boost or undermine our happiness. From physical exercise to gratitude practice to even practicing mindfulness. But one activity that has gained considerable attention and that I'd like to focus on here today is acts of generosity. Now, contrary to what economists suggest, in that people may be these inherently selfish beings that only act in ways that maximize their personal gain, I like to argue that people actually have this extraordinary capacity for generosity, and that the pandemic hasn't changed this. Indeed, there have been countless examples of individuals rallying to improve the well-being of their communities, from purchasing and delivering groceries to the elderly in self-isolation, to organizing donation drives to support frontline workers. And in fact, there are entire threads on Twitter, like hashtag COVID kindness, devoted to documenting these heartwarming examples, with many of the helpers themselves saying how much these pro-social acts have brought them joy. Now, long before the pandemic, people's pro-social behavior has been of immense interest to scholars across disciplines. Just in the past couple decades, researchers have conducted research around the globe and show that generous acts like spending money on others may offer emotional benefits not only for the recipient, but for the giver too. Acts like giving blood or money or time to help others have indeed been shown to increase happiness. In fact, an act of financial generosity, like donating to charity, is one of the top 6 predictors of life satisfaction around the globe. Critically, there have been several meta-analyses which aggregate upwards of 200 studies that conclude that generous behaviors robustly impact well-being for people across the lifespan, from young children to older adults. But to help illustrate this evidence for this effect, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to touch on 2 experiments that I conducted along with my supervisor, Lara Ackman, our colleagues, Liz Dunn and Iris Luck at UBC, and Mike Norton at Harvard Business School. And I want to talk about these studies primarily because they may provide the most recent and perhaps robust experimental evidence to date that one type of generous act, spending money on others, or what is known as pro-social spending, causes people to be happier. So in one experiment, we attempted to replicate a design we like to call the goodie bag paradigm, which has frequently been used by scientists in the past to test whether there are immediate emotional rewards of spending a windfall on others. And in another experiment that I'll talk about, we utilized a popular study design called the recall paradigm, which helps capture whether there are long-term emotional rewards from recalling a past act of pro-social spending using one's own money, much like we did at the very beginning of this session. So let me start with our replication of the goodie bag paradigm. In the goodie bag replication, we recruited over 700 undergraduates across 2 institutions to participate in our in-person lab experiment. And in the lab, participants first reported how happy they were on 2 items, such as, do you feel happy right now? And so this allowed us to get a baseline measurement of people's happiness coming into the experiment. But then participants earned an extra $2.50 for participating in the study, which they could use to buy a goodie bag of chocolate and or juice valued at $3, or they could opt out and simply collect their cash at the end of the semester. But critically, we randomly assigned participants to one of 2 conditions. In the pro-social spending condition, participants purchased a goodie bag for a sick child at Children's Hospital. Meanwhile, in the personal spending condition, participants purchased a goodie bag for themselves. So once participants made their choice, they saw the goodie bag package in front of them by a researcher who was completely unaware of their condition assignment. And afterwards, the researcher handed participants a pre-prepared thank you note to help reinforce their condition assignment. So for example, those in the pro-social spending condition received a note that thanked them for buying a goodie bag for a sick child in hospital. Finally, participants returned to their seat and reported their momentary post-spending happiness on 2 well-used scales of happiness, so the PANAS and the SPAIN. And these basically just ask participants to rate how much joy they felt or how positive their experience was across a number of descriptors. So what did we find? Well, in line with our hypotheses, we replicated a lot of the past work, and we found that participants in the pro-social spending condition were a fair amount happier than participants in the personal spending condition. This effect was similar across both measures of post-spending happiness and held even when we statistically controlled for participants' baseline levels of happiness. So these results suggest that there may be immediate emotional rewards from spending a windfall on others. And importantly, because we collected such a large sample of participants and used a robust design that we actually had reviewed and approved by experts in the field before we collected data, these results provide some of the strongest experimental evidence to date that there are happiness benefits from pro-social spending. But what about the long-term consequences of pro-social spending? Are there any emotional rewards of recalling a past act of pro-social spending using one's own money? So to help answer this question, we recruited roughly 5,200 participants to participate in an online experiment known as the recall paradigm. And just as in the goodie bag experiment, participants first reported their baseline happiness on the same 2 items. And then participants were randomly assigned to either the recall pro-social spending condition, in which they recalled the last time that they spent $20 on someone else, or the recall personal spending condition, recalling the last time that they spent $20 on themselves. Finally, participants reported their current happiness on the PANAS in Spain, and we additionally asked participants to remember and report how happy they were at the time of purchase using the SPAIN. So in this experiment, we replicated the emotional rewards of recalled pro-social spending, using both measures of happiness. Notably, however, people who recalled spending money on others only reported slightly greater happiness than those who recalled spending money on themselves. So the happiness boosts that come from recalling a pro-social spending act may be quite small overall. We did find a larger effect on retrospective happiness, such that participants in the pro-social spending condition reported feeling happier at the time of purchase than those in the personal spending condition. And this may mean that people feel happiest in the moment right after spending money on others. And perhaps the happiness benefits that come from giving simply decay over time. But it's also possible that the effect could just be the work of recollection biases. And so we really do need future work to clarify these competing explanations. But taken together, these two experiments provide compelling evidence that spending money on others promotes happiness. We found that the emotional rewards of pro-social spending were largest in the moment after spending a windfall on others. And while they were detectable upon reflection, the effects appear much smaller. So how can we really try to put this principle of kindness into action? Well, I would suggest finding ways to give your skills and resources to others. This may be donating money to a charity you care about, or food to a local food bank, or volunteering your time to help children in need. Moreover, when going to bed, you could try what we did at the beginning of the session and consider reflecting on your previous acts of kindness during a mindfulness meditation to get that small boost in happiness. Of course, while this study paints a broad stroke, suggesting that acts of generosity may be rewarding, not all pro-social acts are created equal. Indeed, a growing body of work suggests that generosity may most likely impact a giver's well-being when the pro-social acts allow the person to foster social connection with others, when you can see the impact of your gift and feel effective or a sense of competence, and when you freely choose to engage in generous behaviors. So rather than just donating to a charity that serves a cause you care about, consider trying to find a high-impact charity at sites like charityintelligence.ca, which can help you donate to a charity that will make the largest possible impact. You could also consider making a mindful choice each day to perform 3 acts of kindness, like checking in with or perhaps even buying a small gift for a friend or family member. And in fact, this kind of social support could help you experience greater sense of connection with your family members, which, as research shows, may particularly be an important component of people's well-being. Indeed, humans are fundamentally social creatures. We tend to spend most of our waking hours with other people and find those times to be the most enjoyable parts of our day. And so perhaps unsurprisingly then, scientists across the social sciences, from economists to psychologists, have found across hundreds of studies this finding that people are clear sources of our happiness and well-being. So for example, according to the World Happiness Report, having social relations, particularly having at least one person to count on in times of need, is the top predictor of life satisfaction for people around the globe. And converging evidence suggests that the happiest people seem to be those with strong and satisfactory relationships. But what I've found most intriguing by this research is that just in the last couple of decades, research has shown that even minimal interactions with strangers can help fulfill our need to belong and support our well-being. Ironically, though, despite the mounting evidence that even interactions with strangers can bolster well-being, people rarely capitalize on the connection benefits of their peers. Indeed, during most first encounters, people are reluctant to share their true feelings and selves, and fail to engage in any deep conversation that often bolsters connection. And this may be problematic for people's well-being. While close relationships with others like partners, family, and friends certainly offer connection and well-being benefits, people can often overburden these relationships if they rely too heavily upon their close ties to support their well-being. So how can we encourage people to diversify and find greater connection with others in their community? Well, one intriguing possibility
could be to engage in acts of generosity together with others. Indeed, it's possible that giving to charity together with a peer, for example, might offer opportunities for people to both reflect on and share their values with another person as they discuss this meaningful topic. And through this process, people may be more willing to share their authentic selves and engage in that deeper conversation that people that we know helps kickstart connections, but people normally wouldn't do. So to sort of round out this session that I'm doing today, I'd like to discuss 3 experiments that I conducted with my supervisor, Dr. Ackman, and our colleague, Dr. Alex Barash at New York University Stern School of Business, which sort of support the possibility that this collaborative form of giving may promote social connection or interpersonal closeness between peers. So in our first experiment, as part of a larger initiative to examine how collaborative giving impacts generosity, we had an initial look into the impact of collaborative giving on interpersonal closeness. So in the study, we recruited over 200 participants, forming 101 pairs of unacquainted undergraduate peers. And in the lab, participants completed a baseline questionnaire in separate rooms. And then critically, pairs were randomly assigned to one of 2 conditions. In the collaborative giving condition, participants discussed and made a donation decision together. In the independent giving condition, participants made individual donation decisions in the presence of one another. So to make this decision, participants were first sat side by side in a larger room, and were left to watch and evaluate a charitable advertisement in exchange for a financial endowment. And so participants in the collaborative giving condition were paid a joint $10 endowment to watch and discuss the ad together. Meanwhile, each participant in the independent giving condition received $5 to do this independently. Afterwards, participants read that they could donate some, none, or all of their endowment to the charity. But critically, participants in the collaborative giving condition discussed and donated together using their pooled money, splitting whatever remained evenly between them. Meanwhile, in the independent giving condition, participants silently donated in each other's presence using their own endowments. Afterwards, participants completed a questionnaire assessing our exploratory outcomes of interpersonal closeness. So participants rated their closeness across various dimensions, including relatedness, liking, perceived similarity, positive feelings towards their peer, and inclusion of their peer within their self-concept. And our results showed differences across each of these indices of interpersonal closeness. So compared to participants in the independent giving condition, participants in the collaborative giving condition reported significantly greater relatedness and positive feelings towards their peer, greater perceived similarity, liking, and inclusion of their peer within the self, providing initial evidence that collaborative giving may help facilitate social bonds between peers. However, given that these results were largely exploratory, we attempted to replicate our findings in a larger experiment with an additional rigorous control condition. And so in experiment 2, we recruited a sample of over 300 participants, or 155 dyads, to complete a nearly identical procedure as experiment 1. However, we added a private giving condition in which participants made their own donation in a private room. And this condition helped us to compare whether the simple mere presence of someone may also impact ratings of interpersonal closeness. So once again, participants were paid $5, completed a baseline questionnaire, and evaluated a charitable advertisement, either together in the collaborative giving condition or individually in the 2 control conditions. Then participants in the collaborative giving condition discussed and decided together how much of their collected $10 to donate. Meanwhile, participants in the independent and private giving conditions simply decided on a donation using their own personal $5. Finally, participants completed our confirmatory outcomes of interpersonal closeness using identical measures from experiment 1. We also added some new face valid items, assessing participants' enjoyment working with their peer and their interest to work with them again in the future. And consistent with our predictions and replicating our first experiment, participants who gave collaboratively reported higher levels of interpersonal closeness across all of our measures, much more than participants who gave independently or privately. Notably, participants who gave independently in the presence of another felt closer to their peer than those who gave privately. So overall, this suggests that while completing the same task near another person may kindle some interpersonal closeness benefits, compared to completing it alone, the greatest connection benefits appear when people can interact, discuss, and make a collaborative decision. So taken together, experiments 1 and 2 provide initial evidence that collaborative giving may help unacquainted peers forge social bonds. Of course, these results are susceptible to a clear alternative explanation. Working with a peer on any shared task that facilitates interaction, whether it's generous or not, could increase feelings of interpersonal closeness. And so in a third experiment, we included a rigorous control condition in which pairs completed a non-generous collaborative task so we could hold interaction levels constant across conditions and examine whether donating collaboratively with others uniquely leads to any closeness benefits. So we aim to recruit 200 participants in our study. However, the COVID-19 pandemic had a different mindset and halted data collection halfway through, which left us with just over 100 participants, 108 to be exact, or 54 pairs of unacquainted peers. Now, given the uncertainty of when data collection could resume during COVID-19, we ended up conducting an interim analysis, which used techniques that sort of helped us avoid the risk that we'd be reporting a false positive with these data. But in the lab, each participant in the pair received their $5 payment and then introduced themselves to one another in a 3-minute unstructured chat. Critically, after completing a baseline questionnaire, pairs are randomly assigned to 1 or 2 conditions. In the collaborative giving condition, participants discussed and decided together how to donate their collective $10 to 1 of 3 charities of their choice. Meanwhile, in the collaborative investment condition, participants decided together how to invest their $10 into 1 of 3 businesses. Now, participants in both conditions first independently considered and reflected upon their decision preferences. We encourage participants in the collaborative giving condition to reflect on their personal experiences with charity and their charitable values. And we encourage participants in the collaborative investment condition to think about what would be the most savvy business decision for a good return on investment. But after sharing their reflections and making their joint financial decision, participants separately completed the same interpersonal closeness outcomes as experiments 1 and 2, which we put into an overall index of self-reported closeness. We also added a behavioral outcome where participants could choose to exchange their emails with each other to connect with their peer after the study. And finally, we added some exploratory measures assessing participants' perceptions about how sincere their peer was and how deep their conversation was on both validated as well as face valid items. And though our means were in the predicted direction, contrary to our hypotheses, we didn't find a significant effective condition on interpersonal closeness, at least in our interim analyses. So specifically, compared to making a collaborative investment, making a collaborative donation did not significantly boost feelings of closeness, nor did it increase participants' decisions to exchange contact information. However, it's interesting to note that exploratory analyses revealed that participants in the collaborative giving condition perceived their peer to be more sincere and their conversation to be deeper than participants in the collaborative investment condition. And critically, we found that giving collaboratively with a peer indirectly boosted self-reported closeness through both perceived sincerity of one's peer, as well as the perceived depth of conversation. So taken together, this suggests that collaborative giving may boost relational closeness by offering a safe enclave for people to be their authentic selves and engage in deep conversations, both of which are known predictors for forming rich social connections. So across our first two experiments, we found consistent evidence that peers felt closer to one another when they gave collaboratively as compared to individually, either next to each other or privately. And the initial data from experiment 3 do not show that collaborative giving directly boosts interpersonal closeness over a non-generous collaborative task. However, promising exploratory analyses suggest that collaborative giving may indirectly bolster connection by encouraging sincere and deep communication. So taken together, the experiments provide initial evidence that sharing acts of generosity with others may spark social connection. Now, more data are needed to fully discern the value of collaborative giving for social connection and well-being more broadly. But there are ways that you can incorporate shared acts of generosity into your daily life to help reap that sense of social connection. And in fact, with the help of the organizers for the Center of Mindfulness, Compassion, and Resilience who are here with me today, I'd like to take the next few minutes to sort of demonstrate one way that you could engage in collaborative giving. So there actually are various online giving platforms, such as Charitable Impact, which support features like creating a giving group that essentially allows people to give together with others. So what I'll do is I'll actually stop sharing my screen and show you what this looks like in real time. Make sure that I have the right window. All right, can you see that okay, everyone? Great. So what I'm showing here, this is a local charitable foundation in Vancouver who has this online giving platform called Charitable Impact. And the features that they have allow people to actually create what are called giving groups. So people who are inspired by a certain cause can actually create this group and invite others to give to their group so that they can actually make a collaborative donation together. And so what I'd like to do with the people who are here with me today is show how we can engage in collaborative giving to support causes that we care about together. So what I did was I set up a giving group called Giving Collaboratively to support survivors of residential schools. And I did this in response to the recent very tragic news of the remains of 215 Indigenous children being discovered in a former Kamloops residential school. And so what I hope to do with this giving group is to collaboratively support the survivors of Canadian residential schools. So with this particular platform, I was able to create this group and explain the rationale for it, the purpose for it. And what I'll scroll down to the bottom here is actually show you how people who are invited to this group can donate and share comments about why it is that they were donating. So for example, I have a comment here about how the immense loss and tragedy from this news has been rippling around the world. And the practice of residential schools and the current systematic oppression of Indigenous peoples has been rampant even in today. And so my hope was with this donation to be able to show my solidarity with the First Nations peoples and Indigenous nations who have experienced such trauma from these residential schools. And so my hope is that with this collaborative giving group, we can make a larger positive difference to help raise awareness of these awful practices in Canadian history and bring at least some solitude or some solace for people who have survived these horrible experiences. But what I'd like to invite my fellows here today is to also talk about why it is that they gave to this particular cause, and so that we can understand a little bit of their rationale behind this as well. So Tiara, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jason. And again, thank you for the opportunity to give in this. When I gave it, of cou- I shouldn't say of course, but for me, I guess you can say of course, it was in complete solidarity with the First Nations and Indigenous people who have had this sort of treatment over their lives, and the practice of residential schools. Personally, I'm completely against, and so, like you said, really wanting to give some solace, give as much as possible some comfort to these folks and let them know that I myself was thinking of them and holding them in my hearts and in my space. But it was also really encouraging to know that other people in this team, yourself, also had these same mindsets coming into it. And so to know that I was giving with like-minded people, just gave me a little bit of boost of confidence too, to be like, we're doing this together. We're creating this collaborative way of being in solidarity with folks who have been in solidarity with me, as a Black woman with Indigenous heritage from the States. It felt very good to be able to see all of these different folks come together and to create this collaborative gift. So that was the reason why I gave, and want to thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Tara. Is there anyone else who would like to share if they gave to this group?
Thank you, Jason. So I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity and presenting this to us. I hadn't heard of charitable impact before, and it looks like there are so many good charities on there and causes that we can get behind. And I just loved your presentation and the explanation behind how charitable giving not only impacts others, but it impacts yourself as well. And when we're, fulfilled, we're able to then our cup is more full and we're able to give more. So the more full we are, the more we're able to give. I love that. And I just really appreciate hearing about this because to be honest, I don't watch the news that much. I'm not very, I've kind of stepped away from that a bit. So I hadn't heard about any of this happening. And I just really feel grateful that I'm able to maybe make a little bit of an impact for this, because this is really, really so sad and should never have happened. So hopefully this will help towards making sure that something like this doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. Nika, did you want to share as well?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason, first for being here and for a wonderful presentation. We do have comments and questions in the chat for you whenever you're ready for that, but you sparked some conversation with this. Mm-hmm. But I just want to share why I contributed, and a large portion of that is because usually when we contribute to organizations, we're contributing to the organization, right? And so it's this kind of ambiguous thing that we're contributing to, but this was really specific. And I really appreciated the description of where this is going and for what, because we usually don't get those kind of detailed descriptions when we give.
Yeah, I totally agree. And having the capacity to learn more about these initiatives and to share that with other people who are giving and in a like-minded space has just been a rewarding experience for me. And I hope for all of you as well. But what I think I'd love to do with just the end of this demonstration, if technology will permit me, is to actually engage in addition to this expression of values and meaning in our authentic selves, to actually pick and decide where we'd like to spend this $15 that we have in our group here. So I have a couple of suggestions that I incorporated, such as the Indian Residential School Survivors Society and Legacy of Hope Foundation. And they each do different practices, such as giving money and supporting those who are survivors of residential schools, but also trying to increase the awareness of the debilitation and the trauma that has been caused by residential schools in Canadian history, and bring awareness to the oppression that continues to be and it's the current day experience for people who are Indigenous. So I was curious about how we wanted to divvy up this money. Did we want to give all $13 to one or the other? Did we want to sort of give some to one and some to another? What are other people's thoughts?
I'm down to give to both. I think that'd be a great opportunity if we can kind of split it 50-50 and give to both. But I guess it's up to the group.
Yeah. Nika,
I like the 50-50 idea is great.
Sure. I don't know if I'll be able to do complete 50-50, but I'll do my best to, maybe I'll do 10 for one and 5 for the other, because I think I don't know if they'll let me split it, but let me see if I can get this to work here. Technology always.
Should there be, I think maybe 20 in there? Because I just did another 5. I just did
great.
5.
Yeah. If there's 20 in there, then oh, perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, so let's try that. So we can give from this group, and we can give to a charity or your group supports. So if we wanted to do Indian Residential School Survivor Society, let's do 10 for that. And we can give anonymously, or we could also give from our group giving name, Giving Collaborative Support Survivors of Residential Schools. And you can choose to do this in memory or in honor of someone, but for the sake of time, I'll skip this for now. And then, yeah, you can review your donation and send the gift. And there we go. We just sent $10 to the Indian Schools Essential. And then let's just make sure that we do the same for Legacy at Hope Foundation.
Jason, if it's possible, I'd actually like to give the next one in honor of someone that just passed who was like a second grandmother to me. And she was huge in education in Arizona, and specifically in understanding that, there are different ways that we need to be doing this work. So her name was Dawn Knight.
Sure. Do you want to maybe put that into the chat and I can copy and paste it?
Thank you.
Great. And did you want to send any message to the charity or a note to the group at all? No?
Just a thank you.
Perfect. So I love it. So $10 is going to Legacy of Hope Foundation. Woohoo! Thanks so much, everyone. Oh, I feel so good.
Yay!
Wonderful. So thanks for coming to this demonstration. I want to make sure that we wrap up and have time for questions as well. But I basically just wanted to end by acknowledging that certainly the pandemic and quarantine have been rough. But I'll remind you that people are exceptionally resilient, not only because they can adapt to what life throws at them, but because people are mindfully compassionate, and that the social emotional rewards of good deeds may help protect and enhance people's well-being. So go buy a meal for those in self-isolation, send a gift to your frontline workers, and meditate on the value, impact, and connection that your freely chosen good deeds may bring. Start a giving group or a giving circle online and share your authentic selves with people who you can make a difference together with. These independent and collaborative kind acts may not only help those in need and warm the hearts of those scrolling the COVID kindness Twitter account, but they may also put a smile on your own face and help you make a new friend and give you something to fondly reminisce on during the 16th month of quarantine and beyond. So thanks so much for that. And I'd love to invite any questions that the chat has in the last few minutes that we have together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason, for this fantastic demo and research presentation. I know this stuff and I still learn so much every time I hear you speak. So thank you for the opportunity to learn from you and to find ways to give and give back in this way. I think we might have time for one question before we end. So I'll hand it over to either Nico or Jackie.
Tiara, I think that Emmanuel had a question when you were talking about happiness, Jason. So he says, I'm curious to understand how happiness was measured, as that can be a subjective judgment and sometimes difficult to measure. I feel that the happiness charts shown should not be as simple columns of generic gradient of happiness. They should be a more complex ramification of feelings, but maybe this was considered and simply cut short for this session.
Right. So I think we're talking about the data that are shown in the UK sample during the pandemic. Am I understanding that correctly? Yeah. So I couldn't give much detail on those data, unfortunately, but from my understanding, they used validated measures of self-reported sadness and self-reported positive emotion to try to capture negative emotions as well as positive emotions in this sample. But certainly you're right, there are multiple ways of conceptualizing and measuring happiness or subjective well-being and well-being more broadly. But I think this is probably the bread and butter, the standard for most well-being researchers, is to get at self-reported happiness or sadness. And the main reason for that is that well-being is this subjective construct, as sort of the name implies. And so while you could measure things like smiling behavior to get more objective measures of happiness, or you could even look at maybe suicide rates as an inverse proxy of happiness in an area. Getting at these self-reported items gives the value of being able to understand exactly what's going through the head and the heart of the individuals who are responding. And of course, there's always biases when it comes to certain self-report measures and what have you, but theoretically, the concept of subjective well-being is that it is inherently subjective. And even if someone has all the money and cars and fame in the world, they could still be inherently sad and not be happy. And so proxies like that won't give you as much value as getting it from the source and the minds and the mouth of the people who are there. But certainly, while the UK sample is representative, it's still, and it's large, but it's still only one piece of the puzzle. When you look at the global ratings of happiness, there's a much different story than just in the UK. And with that one survey, certainly there's much more data out there, even within the UK, that can provide clarity on that. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
It's a brilliant answer. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant answer, Jason. Thank you so much. So we have 2 minutes left, and so we're going to go ahead and start our closing. As we end today and as we end every day, we want to make sure to close this container with a few important words to make sure that our hearts and our minds are ready to move on into the day. So the first is to definitely thank our guest today, Jason Prue, who came and gave a wonderful presentation on generosity and collaborative spending. I also want to make sure to remind us that we still have time for practice through our mini mindfulness series that you'll find on our ASU YouTube. So feel free to click through there any day of the week if you need some extra practice. And finally, I want to take 1 minute of silence to uplift and hold the space for those who have come before us, our ancestors, for those who have stewarded and continue to steward our land and who have still not been properly reconciled for their ownership of these lands, our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters, and for those who have built our institutions and economies with the blood, sweat, and hope for an equitable future, those who are enslaved, indentured, and subjected to human taxation. So let's take a moment of silence for these groups who have paved the way for us as we continue to fight for equity. Thank you for honoring the space today with your presence. Thank you to Jason. Thank you to ASU and the Center for Mindfulness for continuing to be a bright beacon for our present and our future. And we will see you all next time.